Hello chess friends and welcome to Jozarov chess channel and welcome back to the Meltwater Champions Chess Tour Charity Cup in 2022. So the derby of the day 3 was, I think, the game between Magnus Carlsen and Praggnanandhaa. Who knows, maybe in 5-6 years we'll see a world championship match between Ramesh Babu and Magnus Carlsen, but still, of course, Ramesh Babu is so far one of the most talented players of these days. He's really a beautiful chess prodigy, and of course Magnus Carlsen is the world champion in chess. But who knows, as I said, 5-6 years, the things, I think, in the chess will dramatically change, and so far I think the progress of Ramesh Babu is perfectly fine. I've seen now many games in which he had a really beautiful game against Magnus Carlsen. He lost, of course, many games against Magnus so far, but every grandmaster now these days has lost, I think, many games against Magnus Carlsen. So when it comes to losing Magnus Carlsen, no one is immune to that thing. So as I said, it was a very important game for me to watch, because it's rapid time chess. You can really maybe surprise Magnus with some tactical ideas. Ramesh Babu, we have seen so far, can really play a cool and dynamic game. So I really was curious what's going to happen in the game against Magnus Carlsen. So let's check out now the game. It was, I think, such a really beautiful dynamic Grunfeld, and I didn't see many times Magnus Carlsen playing the Grunfeld defense so far, but in this game the game was really brutal and with tactical shots all over the board. So let's check out now the game. So d4 here played by Ramesh Babu. We have knight to f6 by Magnus Carlsen, c4, g6, knight to c3, and after move d5 we have reached the Grunfeld defense, and we have now this exchange variation with the move e4. We're challenging the knight to c3, b takes c3, and after bishop to g7, knight to f3. So now after move c5 we can notice that many times in the Grunfeld the battle is simply around the square d4. This is something that bothers, I think, white many times. Here in the continuation we have bishop to e3. It's again a pragmatic move. We're simply centralizing ourselves around the square d4. We have now bishop to g4. Notice that the bishop to g4 move is also sort of an attack against the d4 square, because the knight is of course controlling. So you see there is simply now a huge pressure around the square also, which can be supported with the further move c6. So here in the continuation we have rook to c1 by Ramesh Babu, because if knight to c6 happens, then you want to have the ability to play d5, and then of course if d5 happens, then your pawn on c3 could be hanging. So that's why here rook to c1 still main in line, of course. So we have here castling by Magnus, bishop to e2, and now queen to a5. You'll see many times this idea to battle around the square c3 and also around the square a2. Don't get so worried, I think, if you get challenged by this queen to a5 move against the pawn on a2. Sometimes it's really necessary to sacrifice the pawn here. It's, I think, sometimes unpleasant to lose pawns in an early stage of the game, but especially in the Grunfeld, you should simply sometimes sacrifice, and then when the queen takes out the pawn, then you could attack the queen with rook to a1, followed by rook to b1. You could have also a decent activity on the queen side. Notice also that many times when the bishop leaves here the protection of the b7 is actually also one of your main targets here from white's perspective. So there are plenty of things that white can still do, although it seems in the beginning so that black is getting a huge activity with the pieces. So that's why here Ramesh Babu played, I think, a decent idea. He simply castles kingside. We have queen takes a2, and now d5 by Ramesh Babu, targeting of course here the weak pawn on c5. So we have now knight to d7 and now h3. Now comes already a tricky move here by Magnus. He takes simply bishop to f3. The problem is now after bishop to f3 the things could get really wild, because b5 is now huge pawn storm that black could create here. A 3 versus 1 pawn majority on the queen side could cause now many strategical problems here for black. Although the engine likes also the white's position, the engine gives here equal chances, but for a human eye I think it's really unpleasant to play now the game from white's perspective. The pawns are storming, and I would not love to play now the game from white's perspective anymore, especially because in the near future b4 is going to happen for sure, a5, a4. So I'm not sure how to defend this position anymore. So that's why g takes f3 has to be played here. But you see also this move causes now new problems in the position. We have now weak squares here, e5, f4, and also we have some weak pawns, c3, f3. But still this is playable, because at least we're not allowing here the pawns to get stormed. So here queen to a5 by Magnus. We have queen to d2, protecting the pawn on c3, and now c4. Again, a tricky move by Magnus. You see Magnus pulled off already some wild tactics in an early stage of the game. This move c4 actually should have been met here by Ramesh Babu with this idea, bishop to c4. And that was the tricky part of Magnus. He tricked, I think, a little bit here Ramesh Babu immediately, because actually you should allow this scenario, then probably rook to c8 is going to happen, but that's exactly what you should allow here after bishop to e2. Okay, you can have your fun, you can take one pawn, but now with queen to d3 we can get out of this mess. Maybe black could play here something like knight to e5, but now with queen to b1 we can target simply the weak b7 weakness. So as I said, this I think necessary to play the game like this. At least we're kicking away the bishop. Queen to b3, f4 is now also an opportunity, so the pawns in the center will suddenly roll, and I think this is playable position for black. Although again here black is here 2 pawns on the queen side. It's probably black will probably try to push them here a6 b5, but you have, I think, a decent counterplay with queen to b3, as I said, attacking the bishop, then f4 because we're controlling the knight activity. Rook to d1 is here an opportunity, maybe with d6 to break and enter in the center, so this could be a playable position. But as I said, after move c4, Ramesh Babu played queen to b2 and allowed now here b5 by Magnus Carlsen, connecting finally the pawns, and he has now what he wanted to get, a 3 versus 1 pawn majority. So we have a rook to a1, we have queen to c3, and of course you don't want to take queen to c3, you have to take out the pawn, queen to b5, and now knight to b6. And this was, I think, also critical moment, because here Magnus Carlsen could have played immediately this idea, queen to c2, counter-attack against the bishop, but also counter-attack against the rook. So if queen to d7 happens, then we have bishop to a1, and still we can retreat to f6 then afterwards, because also the bishop is hanging. For instance, if bishop to d1 happens, then it's still not a problem. With queen to b2 we can solve now all of the position problems, because now finally white needs to trade off. And now after bishop to b2, you see c3 c2 is finally going to happen, and the pawns are rolling. So this was, I think, a way that Magnus Carlsen could have spiced up the game immediately. He played a slightly inaccurate move, knight to b6, but still he has decent chances, because this pawn is very, very annoying to handle. Even if you trade somehow, even if you try these ideas, bishop to b6, then a takes b6, maybe you can take out this one, but you see you're losing the battle on the a file, so you have to trade off. Here rook to a8, rook takes a8, and even if you take something, as I said, this rook will come into the game. Queen on f3, queen on h3. There's simply too many weaknesses in white's position. So as I said, something went wrong immediately here from Ramesh Babu. In my opinion, this is not the position that you want to get out of the Grunfeld with the white pieces. Here in the continuation we have the rook to c1, queen to f6, and now king to h2. Well, c3. So Magnus is saying, I have now a passer, you should worry about him, because I'm not seeing good ways how you're going to defend it. So here f4, Ramesh Babu is trying now e5 to lock, of course, here the dark square diagonal. He's trying to paralyze black's dark square bishop, but now e5 here by Magnus. This was again unnecessary move by Magnus. He should have played simply queen to h4, and queen to h4 in my opinion is breaking this position immediately, because even if you try something like e5, the position can be broken with the move g5. After f takes g5, you see this pawn is hanging, suddenly again the bishop comes into the game. So it's, I think, really a good position. You can try queen to e4, the king has to move now, you can take out this one and still continue the pressure. So as I said, he could have played this move queen to h4, but he played e5, which allows now here after f takes e6, d takes e6 and queen to e6. Now he's allowing here Ramesh Babu the move e5, and suddenly you see the position is paralyzed, because even if you try g5 now, you see the queen is connected to this e5. We can even take, even if you take here the pawn on f4, bishop to f4, and everything is glued together. This is now a good position, I think, for white. So after move e5, we have knight to d5 here by Magnus Carlsen. He's continuing his pressure around the square e3, but also protects his c3 pawn. So here in the continuation, we have bishop to g4, attacking the queen, because the queen is stuck to the defense of the knight. But now Magnus has this intermediate check, knight to e3, f takes e3, and now queen to a2. And okay, if you play now the game, I think, correctly for white and for black, this game should end probably in a draw, because we have opposite colored bishops, and okay, both players have sort of weird position when it comes to the king, because both kings could be actually endangered. Ramesh Babu Praggnanandhaa has the opportunity to break here maybe the position with move e6 and then include the light square bishop into the game. But also we can notice Ramesh Babu's king is also a little bit unprotected, because it's a little bit naked. You don't have so many pawns anymore in front of the king. So that's why it's really a wild position when it comes to tactics. But if everyone plays the game defensively correctly, I think the game should end in a draw. Of course, here Ramesh Babu covers with the rook to f2, and has now preparation to, of course, include both of these rooks on the attack on the c file. And if this pawn is taken, then white has a solid game. But okay, queen to a3 was here played by Magnus. We have rook to c2, and now beautiful idea here by Magnus, rook to b8. First, he gets his tempo against the queen. The queen has to move, but now a rook to b2. This is really beautiful move. How Magnus Carlsen calculated everything. Still, this is not the lost position for Ramesh Babu, but I really love the way how Magnus Carlsen got these pieces into the game, because now you cannot take, of course, because this queen to b2 is going to happen. You cannot cover with the rook, and the rook will be taken. So here a little bit on the queen side, the position is a little bit paralyzed now for Ramesh Babu. So we have now king to g3, we have h5, a beautiful move here by Magnus. He gets again an extra tempo. We have bishop to f3, and now h4. This is really brutal move by Magnus Carlsen. This is really wild what he calculated here, because if you try king to h8, king to h4, then you get this one, bishop to e5. If you take f takes e5, look at this, rook to b4, the king gets on the same rank where already the queen is. So really wild tactics what Magnus Carlsen pulled off. h4, really a wild move. So we have king to h2. Now Magnus includes now the new rook into the game, rook to d8, and now bishop to d5. This was a huge mistake here by Ramesh Babu. You have to get out of this mess. You have to get out of this second rank mess, because now, for instance, if rook to c2 happens, you still can take, and maybe there are some checks, but at least you can cover. And you see rook to d1 is not an opportunity, because the bishop is covering that square. So this was the only way to defend this position. But after move bishop to d5, Magnus Carlsen played a beautiful move. He played simply a calm move, king to h7, because bishop to f7 is here not working. That's the beauty about Magnus Carlsen's line, because he's giving up the pawns. He doesn't care about his light square weaknesses, but now comes this idea. That's why it was necessary to step back from the king from the second rank. You have to get out of the second rank, because that's always the tactical motive that black is here. Rook to d2, maybe you play something like king to g1, but you see now the rooks will be taken, and here on c2, then you have a double attack. Even if you try in this particular scenario to play something like this, rook takes d2, then we have rook takes d2, and you see now you step back, but now the rook in c1 is hanging. So really wild stuff here that Magnus Carlsen created. But after move king to h7 here, Ramesh Babu finally plays now the move king to g1, but he still didn't improve his position, because here Magnus should have played rook takes c2. Rook takes c2 would win the game immediately. Unfortunately for Magnus, he didn't see that. For instance, if rook to c2 happens, then you have this check, and then of course after this one you could have this idea, queen to d1 with the double attack against the bishop, but also here against the rook. You could maybe try bishop to e4, but now with rook to d2 you take something like this one, and now you can just push the pawn further, or you can take immediately with the pawn. Then you have queen to e1 with d1, and it would be game over here for white. Really wild stuff. Unfortunately for Magnus, he tried queen to a5, double attack against here the bishop. Ramesh Babu plays now huge mistake. Now he should have simply taken the pawn on f7, because now the idea to play rook to d2 is not working anymore, because queen to e4 is the beautiful defensive move. Here Ramesh Babu missed his tactics, because he has now a protection of the c2 rook, but also he creates a double attack here against this pawn on g6. So this is the way that Ramesh Babu should have played the game. For instance, after bishop to f7, rook to c2 would be a must move now by Magnus Carlsen. Here rook to c2, maybe Magnus could pull off here a new check, but now with king to h2 and maybe queen to e1, trying sort of an attack against this pawn on e3, g3. This is still protectable because you could have this idea, bishop to g6, and now, for instance, if you take out the bishop on g6, then you get rook to g2 and the queen will come into the game. It's a very dangerous position. So after move bishop to g6, you have to step back, and as I said, this is protectable. You can maybe try some ideas of queen to e2 or similar ideas. At least you can try to defend this position. But okay, here Ramesh Babu played a very bad move, e4, and allows now Magnus Carlsen to play queen to b6. The queen gets into the game, queen to e3. Now you can play queen to f1, but now with bishop to h6, you see Magnus will take this pawn for sure. In the continuation, we have king to h1, bishop to f4. Now the position is falling apart for the young prodigy. We have rook takes b2, but now of course c takes b2. This is still an annoying pawn. We have rook to b1, and now queen to g3, preparing checkmate on h2. We have rook to b2. It's not a problem because here rook to c8 threatens, of course, rook to c1. There's nothing that can be done. In the continuation, we have now e6. We have now this idea, rook to c1, queen takes c1, but now queen to h3, king to g1, and now in this position, after bishop to c1, in this position, Ramesh Babu, Praggnanandhaa resigns. So really wild stuff. I'm not sure what to say. You see how wild this position can be. Ramesh Babu made a couple of mistakes that cost him the game, but I really like this approach, and I really like his ideas, especially when he played the move e5, when he managed to lock Magnus Carlsen Darksville bishop, but then afterwards Magnus was in sixth gear. I think he played really a dominant and brutal game all over the board. How he included the pieces into the game, how he played in the endgame stage, this is simply world champion material. And as I said, I really love to follow these games because especially Magnus Carlsen can play whatever he likes. We have seen Magnus Carlsen, I don't know, play Grunfeld, King's Indian, Alekhine defense, all of these beautiful variations he still can pull off in such a beautiful way. And here in this game, I think he showed really beautiful tactical skills. So okay, I hope that you enjoyed the game. Really wild stuff played by Magnus. If you want to see more games that we have analyzed in this tournament, here's the link of some games that we have analyzed before. And if you want to see maybe the best chess games of all time, check out my best chess games that we have unanalyzed, the best chess games from the past, with immortal games played by Garry Kasparov, Magnus Carlsen, Vishy Anand, and many more. And if you like this content, don't forget to subscribe to my channel. See you soon with some more videos, and chess is the best, of course.